I first got the idea to do pin squats from a guy called Paul Anderson. Now, Paul Anderson was a fella that kind of got famous in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I think, around that kind of period. He was originally a weightlifter. I think he won a gold in one of the Olympics, and then he kind of broke off from that and went into basically doing circuses and kind of strength shows, like strongman competitor type things, where he was basically being paid money to do these shows where he would kind of do impressive feats of strength. So he kind of made his name, I guess, from both, but predominantly he was known for his incredible strength. And one of the things that he did was to train his legs was to do these barrel squats, where he had the bar attached to these barrels filled with water, and he would dig a hole where he would normally stand and basically make a quarter squat out of it. And then as his strength got better and better, he would fill the hole in and then, increase the range of motion until he was flat on ground, doing, a normal depth squat. So I first got the idea from, he's the first guy that I saw do that. And a lot of people kind of name this squat, the pin squats, Paul Anderson squats, which is basically you start from the bottom position. So the bar's on the pins, you kind of duck down, you start from there and you push up. Now I've taken that idea and I've decided to do the quarter squats, and I've had pretty good effects in my training. I've kind of spoken about this in the last few weeks. I feel like the central nervous system gets an absolute thumping. You fully wake up, all of your musculature wakes up. That's a biggie for me. The other thing, I guess, closely related to that is that the psychological aspect of lifting heavy weight no longer is an issue. When I hit that 210 kilo PR a few weeks ago, as soon as I unracked it, I wasn't afraid of the weight. I wasn't afraid because 210 was not the maximum weight I had on my shoulders up to that point. I was doing the pin squats, and with the pin squats, depending on the height of the pins, I would often go to 300 kilos and do like a very, very small range of motion with that. But I would basically teach my body, feel the bar, what it is to hold 300 kilos. And so at 210, I'm like, whatever, it's not even an event. So the psychological thing when it comes to performance, human performance, I guess with strength and everything, anything sport, is a big, big aspect. If you unrack the bar and walk that thing out and you are not scared, you are not feeling like it's crushing you, you're already halfway there. But if you kind of shit yourself the moment you unrack the bar and you start thinking to yourself, man, this is going to kill me, then it's not going to go well for you, because as we know, fear doesn't do good things to our bodies. You have to not have fear to be able to perform really well, because fear can freaking deactivate us and basically take away some of that nervous drive, sympathetic drive from the nervous system, because fear kind of like blocks us, scares us. We want to run away. So the psychological aspect and central nervous aspect was a big deal for me. And the third thing that I've kind of mentioned that I've kind of felt is that the core gets absolutely lit up. I've spoken about the lower back pumps, which are not good for me. I feel like I need to work on that. But the fact that you have to brace your anterior core incredibly strong, hard contractions is unlike anything else that I've ever done. I've never done any exercise that involves so much intra-abdominal pressure to stabilize your spine. It's one of those things I don't think anything can replicate. I don't care how many planks and rollouts you do. I don't care how many leg lifts. Nothing can replicate hardcore weight on your shoulders. It's just something about it. You can't take a full breath. You can't be half-assing 300 kilos. It's just impossible. So I have a lot of reverence when it comes to pin squats. So that's kind of definitely a keeper for me moving forward. But in the last few days, as you see me here doing this, I've kind of been wondering about block pulls or rack pulls as well. Something that I've kind of come across back in the day. I've kind of played around with it. And because of the recency of the whole thing with pin squats, I thought to myself, there's something about limited range of motion training. I mean, Paul Anderson is somebody that has credibility. I guess, I don't know if you can say this or not, but he's basically way, way, way before the time of serious drugs. Now, I know World War II is kind of when the drugs came to be. Before that, I don't think people had drugs. I mean, I'm not an expert at this, but in the 90s, the 70s, and the 80s, it was kind of readily available. But I'm guessing in the 30s and 40s, people couldn't even get freaking barbells and plates at home properly, let alone these drugs. So when you look at somebody like that of supreme strength, world-known, world-recognized strength, and he did it kind of naturally, then you kind of had to stop and pay attention, because this is someone that has done it naturally, right? And he was doing these unconventional things. And so I think we can learn more from these people than from the people that we're watching today. A lot of these people that we think are natural are not natural, but they're selling us programs which are, frankly, they could be freaking sitting on the couch and dosing these drugs. So I always kind of take it with a pinch of salt when I see somebody do impressive things, because I don't really know if that's for me, because I don't even know if this would work for a natural athlete, natural person. But somebody like Paul Anderson, I'm like, man, it's highly likely that he was natural. Much more highly likely than the stuff we're seeing today. So he worked with small ranges of motion. That kind of led me to do the pin squats, and now it's leading me to think about rack pulls, block pulls. Now, with pin squats, my goal was to keep my torso vertical and to have some sort of dorsiflexion and basically target my quads. Teach my quads to develop tension and force without any momentum coming from the posterior chain. So that's kind of what I like with the pin squats, amongst all the other things that I already mentioned. With the rack pulls and and the block pulls, we're setting the bar below the knees or at the knee level. If you go above the knee, it basically becomes pretty much like a pin squat because your torso becomes vertical. There's very little, it's been well documented by Bogues and Alpha Destiny. There's these channels that I've kind of watched throughout the years. There's basically no point in doing that other than if you want to kind of develop your traps because you're holding on to like crazy weight. So basically we're talking about here having the barbell at your knees and lower. I've kind of set the bar today at the level of my tibial tuberosity, if you will, kind of like that notch of the shin or top of the shin. And what that makes you do basically is have vertical shins and you're leaning over a whole bunch. So this is basically a very, very posterior dominant exercise. In fact, there's no quads at all. So it teaches you how to engage your glutes and your hamstrings really, really well, along with the core, because you need to kind of brace at a really awkward position. This is kind of where a lot of people fail their deadlift. It's kind of the dreaded knee kind of area of the pool where people kind of crumble, because I guess it's the most disadvantageous position for us because the bar has to kind of get over our knees. So it teaches you to do these weird, breaking of inertia at a weird kind of position. So today I kind of walked in and I had this in my mind. I started squatting and I was kind of feeling stiff. And at the moment I started kind of doing the reps with the block pulls, I started feeling better and better and better and better. I've said this many, many times in my kind of time on YouTube here that every single time I've kind of dedicated any sort of attention to my posterior chain before squatting, it has always resulted in better squatting in terms of how my hips feel, how I feel I hit depth, my butt wink, everything feels better when I put some blood through my hips. Now, I've done many different things. I've done super lightweight for many, many reps, deadlifts off the floor. I've done good mornings. I've done the GHD back raises. I've done all sorts of things which has kind of made me feel good about hitting the posterior chain before squats. The good thing with these block pulls is that it completely isolates the posterior chain with a movement which is easily loadable, and it reminds me much like a hip thrust, except we're standing. The reason why it reminds you of a hip thrust is because the range of motion is very, very similar. If you basically picture me doing this in this video, doing this block pull, and you just kind of conceptualize flipping me on my back, it's basically, if you delete the bar from the video, I'm just basically doing a hip thrust with the bar in my hands. I don't like hip thrusts because it's awfully awkward to finish the lift, because I feel like the bar is sitting on your pelvis, and the last thing I want to do is send my pelvis forward and posterior tilted because the bar is basically hitting me exactly where I don't want it. So there's like a pain element there. No matter how much padding I do, it just doesn't feel comfortable. With the bar in my hands, there's no pressure on my pelvis and I can't really contract my glutes. So it's something that I want to play with moving forward. I don't know how I'm going to kind of combine it with the pin squats, but it certainly makes me feel good. And it's purely a posterior chain dominant exercise, which has a potential to load with super maximal weight. Now, I've done this in the past, and I don't think I've ever done, I might be mistaken here, I don't think I've ever done more weight from this kind of knee position than compared to what I can do off the floor. Like, I have to think back, but I don't want to lie to you guys, but I don't think I've ever kind of been so good at block pulls that I can do super maximal weight compared to off the floor. So everything that I've read, everything that I've seen, everyone says that you need to spend some time with the block pulls to learn kind of how to develop tension, this awkward position, and then eventually, after a few weeks, you will lift more weight from the blocks than you do off the floor. So I'm thinking about giving it some time, thinking about doing this because I feel like there is something to working with decreased ranges of motion. For somebody that talks about all the time about ATG squats and things of that nature, full range of motion, raw, it's a big deal for me to kind of come across and say to you guys, I believe in short ranges of motion. There's something interesting about it. Actually, my cameraman gave a really good analogy for this. Both of us basically grew up on basketball courts, not the weightlifting room. So he said, when you first started playing basketball, you don't start jacking up threes. You walk up, you walk into the key, you get the ball, and you start shooting bank shots from freaking 30 centimeters out. And then you spend some time shooting that. And when you've perfected your rhythm, your shot, you step back a bit more. You shoot, you step back. And over time, when you get good at shooting that mid-range shot, then you go a little bit further out and then eventually hit a three. So I guess we can kind of picture weightlifting in that same analogy where we're talking about range of motion versus the distance on the basketball court. So instead of, using other variables, we can play around with the weight or the range of motion really, and have a fixed kind of weight, and then just slowly over time increase the range of motion. Same with pin squats, same with block pulls. You can say load up eventually. I don't know, when I get comfortable with this movement, load up 250 kilos, 300 kilos. Let's just say from like a knee level height block pull, and then slowly over time take a plate off, as in take a part of the block off, and then get lower and lower and lower, and then eventually you get to the ground and you'll be doing 300 off the ground. That's kind of the analogy. That's kind of the theory here. I don't know if the basketball analogy is directly transferable to this scenario, but in my kind of way, thinking about it, I'm like, it makes perfect sense. In basketball, you start off really close. The weight's the same. The basketball is still the same. It's just the distance that we're kind of playing with. In weightlifting, let's play around with the range of motion. Paul Anderson had really good success with it. I'm just wondering, how do I incorporate this? I'm wondering whether I can put in some block pulls to target the posterior chain, and then the pin squats will, I guess, target my anterior chain, if you will, especially when I'm doing a quarter squat position. All right, guys, this is me thinking out loud. Thinking out loud. I'm thinking while talking to you guys. Anyway, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.